Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Satsunami. I'm Satsunami and storming the discussions with me today is my very good friend Adam. Adam, welcome back.
We shall fight them in the podcasts, and we shall fight them on the streams. Hello, it is good to be back for an episode that I am very excited for.
Well, you and me both, because, the slight spoilers / Chatsunami exclusive, we are indeed history buffs, aren't we?
I do have the business cards that list that as my occupation.
Yep. I've seen them, yeah, they're very nice. I like the font, especially. Very neat touch. So, yeah, as you can see today, we are going to be diving into, quite frankly, a very historical subject. Not just for general history of the world, but of course, history in gaming. That, of course, being the Call of Duty franchise. Now, we have talked about Call of Duty in the past, haven't we? We've discussed Modern Warfare, and we've also discussed the Black Ops series, which I think was our first Call of Duty episode.
That was like episode 4, I think, maybe?
Yeah, it was something like that. It was one of the early ones.
Just pups.
Yeah. Back when we were, greenhorn recruits, getting fresh off the boat,
Now we record on veteran.
Yeah, now we're... Oh, don't you start. We try our best. We try to record on veteran.
I put it down to regular.
Yeah, I put it down to recruit for tonight. I'm just letting you run the podcast tonight. So, if you're long-time fans of the Call of Duty series, you may know that it actually began as a World War II shooter. Something that I have to admit you wouldn't really know nowadays, would you?
No, it's been all over the shop now, so...
Because initially it did indeed start from Call of Duty 1 to 3, and feel free to jump in and correct me, Adam, because I get the feeling I'm going to get something wrong here. But it was Call of Duty 1 to 3 began the big, massive franchise that is Call of Duty off on the right foot with its fans. Whether the games have been good or bad, they have just continued, haven't they?
It's just rolled on like a steamroller.
Yeah, and then, of course, by, I want to say, oh God, when did Modern Warfare come out?
2007.
Yeah, and by 2007, we got introduced to Call of Duty moving into the modern age, and then it moved into the future, and then it moved back to World War II. It's exactly as you said. It has been all over the place. But I'm quite curious to know, you actually started with this era, like Call of Duty 1 to 3. You started with this era of COD games, didn't you?
I did. So my first Call of Duty game was one called Finest Hour, which was released for Xbox, PlayStation 2 and GameCube, 2004. So that was the year after the Call of Duty franchise began. Yeah, this was right. This was in the height of when basically lots of shooters were set in World War II. This was like the height, getting kind of towards the tail end of it, of that kind of phase of it. And yeah, like at the time, so I was getting towards the end of primary school at that time, and this is when I was getting really interested in history and in especially the history of the Second World War. And so, I was loving to read books about it. I loved to watch films, and I especially loved to play games about World War II. And so that's how I fell into the Call of Duty series.
I mean, it's a great way to start the series, to be fair.
Yeah, back in it. It was not quite at its peak, but on its right, on the ascent.
Yeah, alongside Medal of Honor, which I know we'll get to that episode one day, Adam.
One
Don't you
day.
worry. One day.
My beloved Medal of Honor. One day.
You're looking forlorn at the window, like, one day.
We joke about the one Atari fan. I think I'm the one Medal of Honor fan. He's like, keep it alive.
As long as you talk about it, it won't go away. I'm sure there's like a Sundance film about that somewhere.
If not, I'm going to make it.
Game of Honor or something. Yeah, don't worry. We'll 3D print you like a Medal of Honor, like badge or something.
Yay, the fan club.
Yeah, with our, I was going to say with our Satsunami 3D printer. We don't have that yet, but
one of these days.
That's what we're saving up for. If you hear like in the background the rattling of like a tin can, yeah, that'll be us. But funny you should say that, because in terms of having like an interest in history, I was also the same, where I was really interested in periods of time, and this is going to make me sound terrible, but like periods of time where things were going on, like I remember studying like a lot of really boring subjects in school, like the locomotives and farming in Scotland and things like that, and you think, oh god, I'm going to fall asleep. Like, did you ever do that?
We did. We didn't do farming in Scotland. We did the liberal welfare reforms of the
Oh.
of the 1900s, which weren't the most stimulating topic, I have to admit.
Oh yeah, I remember that very well. Or I don't remember it well. I think that's kind of a testament to how well
I
they were
remember when the welfare state began.
It was back in 1922. But yeah, when we got to things like learning about the Jacobites, the First World War, the kind of action set pieces of history, as it were.
The quick time events.
Exactly. I was really fascinated, because you think, like, what caused these events and everything, and it was really interesting to me. So that's like what sparked my interest in history. But then there's kind of a conflict here, though, because you were saying you were in primary school when you got the game.
Yeah, towards the end, last few years.
So I think I've mentioned this in past episodes, but my parents were very strict about what I could and couldn't play. As all parents should do. And they wouldn't let me play any games that were over my age. So, like, if I was 13 and the game was a 15, which most Call of Duty games were, I wasn't allowed to touch them. So, it wasn't until I turned 15 years old that, like, a switch flipped inside my head, and I was like, oh god, I'm going to buy all the 15 rated games. So I bought like Halo 3, and of course Call of Duty 3 was my first one. I absolutely loved it. I'm not going to lie, I loved Call of Duty 3. I remember playing it, and going back to it now, it is dated. Don't get me wrong, it's really, really dated. But back then, it was so realistic. You could hear the bullets whizzing over your head, and you were dropping down, and you had like the soldiers coming out of nowhere and grabbing your gun, and you had to wrestle them. And like, did you feel the same way as well when you played Finest Hour?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like the scale of it was like really impressive to me at the time. And Finest Hour is one that we're not going to talk about it on this one, because it's not part of the main series of Call of Duty games. It was more of a side one. It's one that's not. It's probably aged the worst with Call of Duty games. It's not. I wouldn't recommend playing it now unless you got nostalgia for it. But yeah, certainly that scale, and that's something we'll come to talk about when we talk about some of the early Call of Duties. That's what kind of set these games apart from some of their competitors, was that sense of scale. So I was very impressed.
I mean, I have to admit, I'm just trying to think back to that time in my life, and this is me showing my age, where I'm like, I remember those days when my hips didn't hurt, kids weren't running across my lawn, kids weren't teabagging me and shit talking me on Xbox Live, the usual things you expect. Yeah, I remember it being popular. I remember it being popular, and I remember people like talking about Call of Duty, wanting to, know when the next one was coming out. But it was always same with Halo. Like, I knew of it, but I never got to, interact with it. I think I maybe played a little bit of it at a friend's. Ironically enough, I think it must have been either the second one or Finest Hour. But that was like that was a flash in the pan in terms of exposure.
A rare treat.
Yeah, so like I couldn't, like experience the full game or kind of put myself in the shoes of the characters and everything. So yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get that exposure until I was 15, and then I loved it. That's what kind of turned me into a Call of Duty fan. First it was Call of Duty 3, then it was Modern Warfare 2, I think a couple of years later after that. And then, it was just down the rabbit hole of Call of Duty games. But the World War II setting in Call of Duty has always been like a very important one.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as you say, this was the setting that like kick-started this whole franchise. And, I think still a lot of people might say some of the best games like in the Call of Duty series are still ones that were in the World War II setting. So it is incredibly important to its, to the franchise, as much as the franchise then transcended and moved beyond, and did like sprawl out into all these different kind of phases of history, and also like the future and everything. Like the World War II setting is really important to its growth.
It is certainly like a nostalgic hotbed of,
Yeah.
every single Call of Duty fan at some point has played one of the games in the World War II setting, whether it's the originals, whether it's World at War, or the rest of them, which we will get on to. And kind of one of the reasons we are talking about this today is because Call of Duty Vanguard, as of yesterday when we started recording this, has just hit the shelves. And it is, I want to say it's like huge successful sales and everything, which probably is. There's probably
Yeah.
like record breaking, pre-orders and things, even though, even though like our opinions might be different about it. But yeah, because of that, we thought this would be the perfect time just to go back to that setting of World War II and the Call of Duty games that spawned out of that setting, really. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the main Call of Duty games set in World War II. So we're going to be covering Call of Duty 1 to 3. We're going to be tackling World at War, World War II, and we will also be tackling a little bit of Vanguard. Now, please note there are going to be spoilers in this podcast episode, except for Vanguard. I mean, I'm halfway through it just now. And I know, Adam, you finished it last night, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I blitzed it all night.
I know. You
'Cause I'm
absolute mad lad. Yeah, I salute my helmet to you. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to go into spoilers for all of these games except for Vanguard. Vanguard is going to be a completely, spoiler-free zone. So if you're worried about listening to this episode and you still haven't played Vanguard, don't worry. You can still listen, spoiler-free for that. One thing I want to mention as well is this episode will be going into some very sensitive topics. Of course, we are going to be talking about themes relating to the Second World War. So just a heads up for that and just a warning in case that is something you might feel uncomfortable with or you just want preparation before we dive into that. Just in case, we're letting you know just now. Without any further ado, will we just jump into it?
Let's get going, get parachutes on and bail out this aircraft.
Yes, and before we do, we just have to listen to a couple of transmissions coming up from our HQ, so bear with us and we will be right back. Welcome to Satsunami, a variety podcast that talks about topics from gaming and films to streaming and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we discussed Game of the Decade, Deadly Premonition, the romantic thriller, Birdemic, and listen to us get all sappy as we discuss our top 5 Christmas films.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We are Beer and Chill Podcast.
Podcast where we review TV shows, games, movies, and whatever else takes our fancy.
So what are you waiting for? If you're a cool kid like us, you're gonna listen to the Beer and Chill Podcast. You can get it anywhere from Spotify all the way to your grandmother's radio. My name is Jan.
And I'm Craigie C.
And we are
Beer and Chill.
And that is affirmative. We will indeed be following those messages. Will we dive into the main discussion?
let's go for it. I'm ready.
Okay, so I will let you lead the charge for, for quite possibly the most nostalgic era of Call of Duty. So the floor's all yours.
So we go all the way back to 2003, which, I don't know about you, but to me seems like, I don't know, millennia ago now. Trying to think back to that. But so 2003 was when the first Call of Duty was released. And I didn't play it at the time. I played it about, I must have been a year later after I played Finest Hour and a bit, and I got a laptop that could actually run it. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed the original Call of Duty. And I think there are two things that are really, really fascinating, really interesting, and really important about the first Call of Duty game. Like comparing it to what other World War II games there were on the market at the time. So the main competitor at the time, the kind of big dog in the World War II kind of FPS genre, was the Medal of Honor series. And I really, don't get me wrong, I love the Medal of Honor series, I am a fan, but it was starting to slightly kind of run its course a bit by the kind of early 2000s. I think people were looking for something quite fresh and different, and that's what Call of Duty provided. Most of the Medal of Honor games, they're very American-centric kind of views of the war. And really, a lot of the stories, it's like you're the kind of, classic one-man army, like taking down like the Nazi war machine, single-handedly, basically. And Call of Duty, like, as much as it was still like, it had these kind of like big kind of fights and big action set pieces and kind of it was Hollywood-esque at points, it was different from that kind of Medal of Honor like format in that there was a lot of, well, first of all, for a start, it wasn't just an American-centric thing. In the original game, you play as an American soldier, but also a British and a Soviet soldier. So you got an expanded view of the war, and that was something that was quite different. And I don't think many other games had, if any other games had done that at all. So it was really refreshing to go to like places like the Eastern Front. As much as places like Stalingrad now have become like well-worn territory in World War II games, that was still quite novel and fresh in 2003 to get that kind of international perspective. And as well, like the big focus on Call of Duty was that you were fighting alongside like your allies and stuff. And you for most levels you had like fellow soldiers with you and stuff. And it was more kind of like these kind of larger scale battles. And you kind of felt like you were part of something bigger, which was something the Medal of Honor wasn't really doing. And so it really differentiated itself. And I think that's why, like, those two reasons were why the game, and plus the game was just fun to play as well. It was really good. Like, it had really good levels. It was really robust. It had a good multiplayer. I mean, I didn't play any of it, but I know it was very popular at the time. So like that's kind of the reasons why it really like caught fire and people really were excited about. I mean, as crazy to think it is now as a series which is like so like maybe makes people like lethargic and like roll their eyes as Call of Duty. This was really fresh and exciting in 2003. People were really excited about it. I still like this first game. I still go back and play it every now and then. I think it's held up pretty well. In fairness, I don't know if you've never played it before. I don't know what the experience would be like now. You might find it quite dated. So I would, if you want to play it, I would say I'd maybe urge a bit of caution, just in case perhaps it has dated more now. But like certainly if you have nostalgia for it and you haven't played it in a while, I'd recommend, and if you can, fire it back up again because it still holds up really well. And yeah, I still really like it. But as much as I loved the first one, let me tell you, my mind was blown by its sequel, Call of Duty 2, which came out in 2005 and was a launch title for the Xbox 360. It also came out on PC. And this was the first game that I got with my Xbox 360 and the game that I played. And this, Call of Duty 2 is probably one of the games I've played the most in my life. And I love this game. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And yeah, just like the scale of it again and just the graphics for the time were just mind-blowing. I've never seen anything like it and I couldn't believe it. And it was just so engaging. It drew me in. And it's that same style again. It was, you have your American campaign, your British campaign, and your Soviet campaign. But they were all three of them were pretty distinct from each other. So you got a good variety there. The levels were basically great all across the board. Like the gameplay was solid, the shooting was great, and it's funny looking at it now. It's such like a simplified experience compared to a lot of the kind of what Call of Duty is now. It's very much like there's no real filler at all. It was like, here's what we do. We're a first person shooter, and this is what we're going to make it the best one that we can. And I still think it's great. I would highly recommend. Like if you played it before and loved it, go back and play it. It's still great. And honestly, I think as well, if you haven't played this one, I don't think this has aged that badly. I think you could go back and you'd still really enjoy this. And you might actually find it a really refreshing pace as well, a really kind of refreshing change from what Call of Duty is now. So I really urge, if you can get it, go play it, because to me it's near flawless. Like I think Call of Duty 4 is probably still the best of the Call of Duties, but 2 is really close to me. I just think it's spectacular.
That's actually quite interesting. So would you suggest that if there was any game that people should try out in this series of World War II Call of Duty games, it should be the second one?
For me, certainly, it's my second favorite out of the whole series. I would recommend it. I would say it would be one to check out because I think it's fascinating now to look at and see what Call of Duty once was and to kind of see how it's changed now, but to go back to that very kind of like simple and robust experience that it was. And so yeah, like I would recommend checking it out because I still think it's great.
Yeah, this is going to sound terrible for a podcast episode about this topic, but I haven't had much exposure to those games, so it is quite interesting hearing your take on them because, as I said, mine was the third one, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but was Call of Duty 3 the first one they started introducing the regeneration health system?
No, that was actually Call of Duty 2. Call of Duty 2 was the first one to bring that one in. interestingly, like only two Call of Duty games, like out of the main kind of canon of games, have bar health, have like the kind of classic bar health in them. Both are set in World War II, but yeah, like regeneration health was something that came in quite early to the, and it was actually Call of Duty 2 was one of these games that kind of popularized it as like a single, because like Halo had that the original Halo had that hybrid system where you had like a regenerating shield and then like kind of like your bar health below that. But Call of Duty 2 was the one that kind of popularized this as like regeneration health as like the sole health mechanic.
That's interesting, because I wasn't sure whether it was like introduced earlier, because I remember, as I said before, I remember playing something like Halo 3, and you know how that's just like the shield system, where it's like, you know, we take so many hits and you have to hide and wait till it recharges, and you know, like going back to something earlier like Halo 1, where it's like you've also got health packs and things. And it was the same, I remember, with, I think it was the first one that I played like years and years ago, and what limited exposure I got from that game, there was like a level where you had to run around and you had to grab health packs, and compared to like what was out at the time, you know, like Modern Warfare 2 and all of those games where it was just the regen health system. Yeah, no, that's quite interesting though, so thank you for clarifying that.
I'm happy to wax lyrical on Call of Duty 2 all day, so stop me now.
Of course. And that, of course, leads us on to Call of Duty 3. I'm wondering if, because I think during the time this came out, correct me if I'm wrong again, but was the market not like very oversaturated with World War II shooters?
Yeah, like this was really reaching that kind of like point where, as you said, oversaturation is the best word for it, and people were getting really fatigued with like, I remember people talking about that being like, oh, no, not World War II again, you know, like that way. This really was like the kind of like tipping point that was just so like, it felt like every first person shooter was like getting thrust into World War II.
Because I do remember picking up this game, and as I said, because this was my first Call of Duty game, I was absolutely blown away at the time. I mean, this came out in 2006, so yeah, take my opinion with a pinch of salt, but at the time, it just looked fantastic. You know, you had, as I said before, the bullets whizzing over you, you were like dodging the enemy as they were like shooting at you. I mean, going back to it, I think I went back to a couple of years later since I started like playing it. It didn't age well, not gonna lie. It did not age as well as some of the other games, because like I'd been playing like Modern Warfare, Black Ops, where it's like you could run about and everything, and when you go back to COD 3, it's like the strafing mechanics.
Yeah.
It wasn't great, but at the time, as an introduction, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It kind of was one of the catalysts for my love of like FPS games and shooter games as a whole, so I can't take that away from it. One thing I have to admit is the scope in it seems to be quite limited compared to the other games. Like, as you said before, and I think it's the first one that focuses on like Stalingrad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the big part of it.
Yeah, like, so you've got like the, you know, the perspectives on all fronts, whereas in COD 3, for the version I had for the PlayStation 2, you've got the Americans who, you know, Americans being Americans, blazing through France and Berlin, trying to liberate it from Germany, and then on the flip side, you've got a like kind of sub-story with the SAS trying to like do like sabotage outposts and things.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying?
Yeah, so like the whole game revolves around kind of the latter half of the breakout from Normandy, which is kind of the period after D-Day, when the Allies re-land in France towards the end of the war. And so like the game, like as you say, it's a much more confined setting. So it's exclusively in France, exclusively on the Western Front, over like basically a period of like 2 months in the war. And so it's a much more like it's all kind of like French villages and French countryside, you know, for the bulk of, and some towns and stuff for the bulk of the game, as opposed to like Call of Duty like 2 and 1, where you would fight in like the North African desert, in like Russia, in Germany, like across different kind of locations. It was a much more fixed, because they wanted to tell like a kind of narrative. This was like really the first Call of Duty to try and have like a kind of unified narrative, where you had like character development, you know, and like you got to know characters more than they kind of were in the older games. So I think they decided to put it in that more kind of like just in one kind of setting to try and aid that.
Fair play to them though for actually doing that. And I mean, would you say they pulled it off?
I think they did to an extent. Like, I think it should be lauded for, like, it's an important one because it's the first attempt in this series to create a kind of unified narrative, which was something that, like, became far more important to later games. This was also Treyarch's first main Call of Duty game, the company that would go on to make the Black Ops games, go to do that series. So it's important in that respect. I think the problem with this game is it feels rushed, and it was rushed because the Treyarch got a very limited amount of time to make it. And so while I love Call of Duty 2 for how robust it is and how well it's held up, I don't think this one has held up as well because it's a bit more rough around the edges. They also relied quite heavily on QuickTime events. I think that was, I think, a mistake. Some of them are quite good. There's some quite good ones where you have to, like, you kind of mentioned, like, the kind of hand-to-hand fighting that you have to do. But there's too many sometimes where you have to, like, plant explosives, and it takes so long. You have to go through, like, 3 different, like, things to, like, plant the explosives, and it's just like, oh my god. It got too much from that level. So I think it's important for some of the things it introduced, but I don't think it quite pulled it all off, to be honest.
I have to admit, I still get jump scared. See, I think there's 2 instances of it, but it's like where you walk through a door and a German soldier comes out and grabs your rifle, and you have to, like, mash. Well, for the PlayStation, it was circle, so it would have been like B, I think, for the Xbox. But you have to, like, mash that constantly to get him off you. I remember jumping at my skin the first time I saw that because I didn't know that was coming, and I was tempted to be like, nope, forget this game. But I'm kind of glad I stuck with it and persevered, because see, this is a thing that I'm going to touch on, like, for the next game and like later on. But for the early games, and I'm emphasizing the word game here, but would you agree that these almost feel they feel more like games than they do like narratives?
Oh, definitely. Like, especially for, like, 1 and 2, like, it's a pure, like, quote unquote game. These aren't, like, narrative experiences in any way, shape, or form. And that wasn't what they were trying to do. Like, that's why they're kind of so refreshing in a way as well, in that it was just like the story was the war, and that was kind of like it was the story, but it was the backdrop. You weren't, like, expecting your allies to, like, grow and change, and develop personalities and stuff, because that's not what it was. It was a game.
And I mean, that is definitely the thing that separates it, I want to say. Like, it separates these, like, trilogy and, Finest Hour to an extent, but, for the main series, it separates this trilogy from basically what was to come, really, for the World War II games. Because it wouldn't be until 2 years later, so the next year for Call of Duty games, and I can't believe it was 2007 that Modern Warfare came out, but then in 2008, we of course got Call of Duty World at War, which, again, it's a Treyarch production. It is quite possibly one of the... Is it right to say it's one of the most well-received Call of Duty games of all time?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think its reputation has also grown retroactively in a way from, like, after the time, because I remember the time when it was announced, a lot of people were like, oh, World War II again, because we'd had Modern Warfare, and that had been, like, just blown people away. And so I remember at the time people being like, oh man, I don't want to go back. Don't want to go back in time. I want to stay in the modern setting. But I think it's definitely one that, like, as the years have gone by, looking back at it, its reputation's just grown.
It was definitely worth going back to, though. Definitely.
Without a doubt.
Because I have to admit, I think I was in a similar boat. I think I got into, like, getting an Xbox 360 really late because of the whole, Red Ring of Death thing and, all of those lovely shenanigans. And I remember one of the first games that I actually got, other than Halo 3, of course, was Modern Warfare 2. Absolutely loved that game, of course. So when they announced that, we're going back to World War 2, I was kind of in a similar boat. I was like, do I really want to go back to this? And it was, like, definitely going through the grapevine where people were saying, oh, this is a great game, and, oh, you should try it. And funny enough, this is going to sound like a weird story, but I remember there was one day where I had to go to, like, a university open day. Have I told you this story?
Carry on, I'm trying to remember.
So basically, I went to this university open day with a couple of friends, and we went to the city, and we did our, what we were supposed to do there. And then we ended up going into this, like, massive store here called HMV. We went upstairs, and I remember I was looking for my friends, and I was like, oh, where are you guys? And I saw one of them sitting at, it was like, the TVs they used to put out so you could try buy the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a heads up to all those future kids out there. Yeah, in the past they actually put out the games with a controller you could use. Probably not now because of COVID, but back then they used to. And I remember he was playing, like, I think it was the demo for World at War, and I was like, what's that? Because he was holding I can't remember what the gun's called, but it looks like the Starship Enterprise.
Oh yeah, the big Russian light machine gun.
Yeah, and it's got like the big disc on
Yeah.
top that's like the magazine or
DPK, I think, or something like that. I
yeah.
can't remember.
It's an iconic gun, but I remember seeing that and being like, what is this game? And, he was like, oh, it's the new Call of Duty game. And I was like, what? This is a new Call? I was like, nah, I don't think I'll get it. And I think, like, I did wait. I didn't get it on release, but I think I waited and then got it, like, pre-owned or something. And I love it, but it is an intense game. Just to kind of explain what this game is about, like, obviously it's about the Second World War, but it takes like such an interesting perspective. Up until this point, the majority of the Call of Duty games focused on Europe. Is that right in saying that the majority are set in Europe?
Yeah. It was majoritively Europe and kind of like the Western theatre.
Yeah, so yeah, you've got the British, as you said, the British, the Americans, the Russians against the Germans and everything. Don't get me wrong, you do get Soviet Union versus Germany in this period, but you also get the Pacific Theatre, which, correct me if I'm wrong again, which you're going to be hearing that a lot, Adam, so apologies. But I think this is the first time we actually see this in the series.
In a Call of Duty game, it certainly was.
What kind of sets this game apart is how brutal it is. See, compared to the other games, even Modern Warfare, I would go as far as to say that this is still one of the most brutal Call of Duty games. See, before they started doing controversy for the sake of controversy and like, oh look, we're going to blow up a child. I'm looking at you, Modern Warfare 3. You think I forgot? No. No, I still remember. But with World at War, I mean, we are introduced to like a savage, American troops that have been captured by the Japanese. You see one of your comrades get his throat slit. This is like in the first 5 minutes. You see the blood pouring out, you're about to get your slit, but you get rescued at the last minute. And this is something I feel as if elevates it further up than some of the other games, because as I said, Call of Duty 1 to 3, although they were good experiences at the time, when you go back to revisit them, they still feel like video games. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say because they are video games, but there was more of like a visceral experience for World at War, because some of the things that happen in this game are absolutely brutal. There's one particular level that I know, Adam, you'll absolutely love this one. The Vendetta level.
Yeah.
So usually in these games, you're like a fresh private or something like that. You're fresh off the boat. You've got your shiny M1 Garand, or your Tommy gun or whatever, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna, fight the Germans. I'm gonna fight the, Japanese Empire. And it's like, no. In this one, you're just thrown right into the thick of it. You're having to like trudge through jungles in the Pacific Theatre. Every time something blows up or goes wrong, you have to brace for an ambush. It puts you on the edge of your seat. But the introduction to the Russian campaign is nothing short of absolutely stellar. It actually starts off on I think it's the aftermath of Stalingrad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's during the battle.
Oh, during the battle, thank you. Yeah, during the battle, you wake up as basically a defeated Soviet soldier. You're lying in this fountain and you're watching as all of these German soldiers come through and they start shooting, people who are still alive, and you start crawling on your belly through all these dead bodies, trying to figure out what the hell's going on, where you're supposed to go. And that's when you meet Viktor Reznov, who is your commissar, is it? Or like your captain?
I think he's a sergeant or
sergeant, yeah.
I can't quite remember. I
can't remember, but yeah, and he basically like leads you through Stalingrad. And what follows is just this intense game of cat and mouse where he gives you a rifle, and you have to like pick off the German soldiers just at the right time, like when the bombers are flying overhead, so your shots get drowned out by the sound of the engines. Just fantastic little tidbits like that. And then you get into like a sniper battle later on, which is one of the hardest things to do in Veteran, can I just say. And overall, like, don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect game. It's got its kind of low points and high points, but overall I think that it definitely explores the themes of World War II. I would say probably it's the best one out of all of them in this list that we're going to talk about, because it doesn't glorify the war. And it shows that even though, obviously, the regime that we're fighting against, the Nazi regime, is abhorrent, it's despicable. You don't have to have me telling you that it's like one of the worst regimes in history. But at the same time, we see like some of the things that the Red Army gets up to, like burning unarmed soldiers alive. We see, you know, just all of these like horrible, horrible moments. Like on either side. It's not a cheery World War II game though, is it?
No, not at all.
It's like even in Call of Duty 3, I remember at the very end, like you have to hold off against like a German, I think not an ambush, but it's like they start trying to invade the city and you have to hold out until reinforcements arrive. And it's like when you're fighting in that, you know, you've got the swelling music and the bombastic, you know, everything's blowing up and there's the bullets going by, and you know, you've got the Americans yelling, "We've got to hold this position," and you know, they're shooting, and you know, eventually I can't remember if they have planes that come in at that point, but you know, like eventually, you know, the Americans win the day, spoilers, and that's it. You know, like it is very triumphant. In this one though, there's only one moment I can think of that's triumphant at the very end, where you storm the Reichstag as a private in the Red Army and you manage to plant the Soviet Union flag on the Reichstag, which is like a very famous picture in history, of course. But they make it dramatic, don't they? Where you get shot and you know, you're limping. But again, that's a similar thing where the music swells there, because you get shot and you think, oh no, I'm going to die. And Rezanov, who of course is voiced by Gary Oldman, so that just makes it 10 times better. But he comes out of nowhere and slashes the German soldier and he helps you. And you know, honestly, like Rezanov should have his own line of motivational posters. I'm saying it now, but you know, and he helps you, and then you stab the flag into the Reichstag, and that's it. It kind of signifies the end, or not the end of the war, but you know what I mean, like a kind of definitive conclusion. Whereas the American side is a lot more like somber. Like you lose a lot of men, and you lose like a lot of your comrades, even though, you know, you managed to fight your way through. As an experience, I would say it's definitely one of the best. In terms of gameplay, I'm going to be honest, see playing this in Veteran, it's the same with Modern Warfare, but playing this in Veteran is terrible.
It's brutal.
Because it's like, you can't camp in it because people like throw grenades at you. You're surrounded by them and you're like, well, shit. I've done it. I have completed it in Veteran, but never again. Absolutely. 110%, never again. Not doing it. No way, Jose. Maybe for charity, but no. Other than that, no. But what were your thoughts on it? Sorry, that was a massive ramble from my end.
No, like it's a game that deserves to be discussed, to be honest, because I think it is one of the standout titles in the whole of the Call of Duty series. I agree with basically everything you were saying there, and like I think what makes this game so excellent for me is, as you were talking about the themes, that like it's not so much a narrative like experience, it's more like the themes of like how horrific, like, you know, how horrific the war was in general, but particularly how horrific like the fighting in the Pacific and on the Eastern Front was. And honestly, like, I think this game has one of the best bits of role-playing, one of the best bits of role-playing in a Call of Duty game, certainly. Maybe as well in a lot of other, maybe one of the best in gaming that I can think of, certainly when it comes to the Soviet campaign, because it really kind of like, it doesn't explicitly ask you, but it kind of like subconsciously asks you to like put yourself in the shoes of like a Soviet soldier entering Germany and entering Berlin at the end of the war, and like having seen like what the German army has done to the Soviet Union, you know, and the atrocities that it's committed, you know, in that country and against those people. And it asks you to sympathize with this army of like revenge, basically this like avenging angel that's going to come and like wreak havoc on Germany for all that it's done. And like, and that's, you get a lot of like moral choices in the kind of Soviet campaign about, as you say, like, you know, what do you do with unarmed German soldiers? And spoiler alert, like it doesn't end well for them either way.
Yeah.
but it kind of asks you to be like, what would you do in that situation? And you almost I think the way to properly play it as as a Soviet character is to like play it as this like hate-filled person who doesn't view like the Germans as like fellow humans, just views them as like kind of like demons and whatever, like to basically be like destroyed. And I think on that level, it's actually a really important like form of media examining the war, because I think it really taps into those kind of like those emotions behind it. And I can't think of many other games, like World War II games, that have done it that well, or have done it that well at all. So I think it's a really excellent game, and I would I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, as you say. It is a brutal game, and I think it's worth like stressing that again, like that there is a lot of like there's a lot of stuff in here that isn't like that's not fun at all, and it's quite harrowing. So like, but if you're okay, if that doesn't put you off, then I would recommend checking this game out. It's great.
It is definitely the most brutal, because I think, and I could be wrong in saying this, but I think this was the first Call of Duty game where limbs actually came off when you shot them.
I think it might have been the first 18, I think, as well.
Was it? Oh, wow.
Or maybe it was a 15 still, but certainly I think you're right with the kind of the delimbing and everything.
There was definitely a lot of controversial stuff in this game. But what I think is good about it for the most part is it's not so much, well, maybe it's a bit over the top and maybe it's a little bit gratuitous, where you get like limbs flying off and blood pouring out, but it's not a glorification. That's the thing I want to stress here. I never felt, other than the very end, of course, I never felt like, they were saying, oh, we're going to win the war, and oh, we did the best because we are the good guys and things. And obviously, the Allies are the better half of this war. But it's, as you said before as well, it's like the Soviet side is a revenge fantasy, as it were. And that scene in particular where you corner those, and I know I keep going back to this, so apologies, but where you go to these unarmed German soldiers, and there's one particular private called Private Chernov who throughout the story he writes in his diary, and it's quite interesting because Reznov always berates him. Like, if you notice this, like for Dmitri, the character you play as in this like campaign, he always praises him because obviously you're the player, you're the pragmatic one, you're the one that does everything, gets the job done. And he even says that throughout the game, is like, as long as Dmitri lives, the heart of the Red Army will go on. And you're kind of like, stop it, you Reznov. Yeah. Stop it, Reznov, you big sook, Whereas Chernov is like, Chernov, can you stop breathing? It's like you're really getting on my nerves. And he actually reads like excerpts of his diary, and depending on the choices you make in the game, it's quite interesting because they can change. It doesn't make a huge difference to the game, but it's quite interesting because he comments like, back to the unarmed prisoners, he comments like, if you shoot them, he says, at least it was merciful, whereas if you leave them, then the Red Army soldiers throw Molotovs at them, and obviously that causes them to burn alive. And he says, oh, it's cruel and everything. And it is like just such a really interesting perspective. And I know I keep saying that, so apologies for repeating myself, but I do think it does it really well. There's not really any glorification of the war, which there shouldn't be in the first place, but you know what I mean. There's no like right or, well, not right or wrong, but there's no, oh, yay, let's go finish the war. Yay, we're coming back to a hero's welcome. And maybe that says a lot more about me as a person to be like, yeah, I like my World War II stories, miserable and everything, but I don't know. I just think overall it does a really good job of that. And kind of just before we move on to the final game, will we touch on zombies?
I think it's important because obviously this was the game that started it all.
Yes, of course we're referring to the, I suppose now infamous, but at the time famous game mode Nazi Zombies. And Nazi Zombies was just like a horde mode where you had to hold, or was it horde mode? Can you call it that?
Yeah, it was a horde mode. Basically.
Yeah, so it was like where you had to hold out in this like this abandoned building, and zombies would climb in, and you'd have to like shoot them dead and everything. It was like simple, but it was so effective and it was a lot of fun to do. And because of the popularity, they introduced like new characters, they introduced the whole story. And in World at War, I will admit, I would say World at War / Black Ops 1 is probably where the height of that went. Like, that was the height of the series. After that, it just became a load of nonsense. I'm sorry. If there's any like zombie fans out there, fair enough, fill your boots, you enjoy what you want to enjoy. But personally for me, I didn't like it. I genuinely don't like where Zombies is going. It's just over the top, too complicated. I don't care about the ether. I don't care about secret Nazi scientists probing the dead. I genuinely, I don't care. I just want a game mode that I can shoot zombies in. I don't want anything else. And I know, like, we've got a couple of friends, don't we, that like love this game mode.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
You know who you are.
Yes. You listening to this, you know. Oh, you know. But yeah, it didn't really get any better. But that it has to be credited, though. World at War has to be credited for introducing that game mode. And speaking of introductions, will we move on to the final game? Unless you've got any other like final points about World at War.
No, let's move on to let's get this next one going.
Okay.
We fast forward to 2017 now, and it had been 9 years since Call of Duty had been in World War II. But in 2017, Call of Duty World War II was released, and this was developed by Sledgehammer Games. This was their second full game. Sledgehammer had kind of been drafted in 2011 to help finish off Modern Warfare 3, while one of the main studios, Infinity Ward, was kind of going through some internal turmoil. And after that, they kind of got put into the rotation of being like a main kind of Call of Duty developer by Activision. And so they'd made Advanced Warfare was their first, was Sledgehammer's first kind of standalone Call of Duty game in 2014, if memory serves. But this was their second one, 2017. And this was a big deal that Call of Duty was going back to World War II. And I remember the marketing for this. There was like one of the famous adverts had basically this person like phoning up his old friends who used to play Call of Duty with and being like, Call of Duty's going back to World War II. And it was almost like this way, like, we're going back to basics, we're going back to like the kind of peak, of this series where it was like rising in popularity and where everybody loved it, because this was a series now that it was making people were getting lethargic with and people were getting kind of fed up with. So in a way they were trying to go back almost to like freshen things up again. And for myself personally, I was so excited when I heard that this game was going back to World War II. I've never been fatigued by the World War II setting. I still am not. I still really enjoy playing games in it. So I was so excited that Call of Duty was going back. And especially because I'd started to fall away from the series. I mean, I used to get all the Call of Duties on release day, but for the last couple before World War II, I'd kind of fallen away from that. And I never even got Infinite Warfare, which was the one before, which was the space adventure one. I don't know if we'll ever talk about that game in a future episode, but
one day.
that was one that got a lot of backlash when it was announced. But anyway, so it came back to World War II, and people, including myself, were very excited. So we eagerly got the game, and it's a game that I've had lots of mixed feelings about. I remember when I played it first, this was a time as well where Call of Duty campaign started to get very, very short. This one is 10 missions long. It doesn't take that long to go through. It doesn't take that long to go through at all on like the easier difficulties. And I remember being disappointed by that. And I was just disappointed as well because I was really wanting a game that went back to that kind of Call of Duty 2, Call of Duty 1 like format. That's what I was kind of expecting, but it wasn't. As much as there was the World War II setting there, this was still very much a game like in the vein of like Advanced Warfare, Infinite Warfare, or kind of what the Black Ops games had become. And it was again like a kind of a central unified narrative with a very small kind of cast of characters, and you were supposed to like the game was really trying to get you to identify with these people and their journey and stuff. And it was all the levels are very cinematic and it feels very scripted, and you feel like you're kind of getting shuttled from like one like set piece to another. It doesn't really have the kind of flow that some of the older games had when it wasn't so much like set piece to set piece. It was something else like, and so I was disappointed by that, I have to be honest, when I first like finished the game. I've gone back and played it a few times now, and I've kind of warmed to it a bit more. Like it's not my favorite game, but I think there is stuff in it that I like, and I think actually it has one of the best levels in any Call of Duty game, which is a level called Liberation, where for the first half of it you take control of a member of the French Resistance, and you have to infiltrate the main kind of German headquarters in Paris just before the uprising that would liberate Paris. And you need to kind of find a specific like German officer who's going to defect in there, and you're given like a cover story, and you have to remember certain details because like some of the enemies will question you on things. And it was just something so fresh and so different, and like it was almost akin to All Gillied Up, the kind of like stealth sniper mission from Call of Duty 4. I don't think it's quite as good. Liberation's quite as good as All Gillied Up, but it was such a breath of fresh air, and it felt so different, and you were like, oh my goodness, like it really kind of shook you awake from the rest of the game, and that was great. But a lot of the other levels, I don't know, it felt like that kind of like standard like highly scripted, highly cinematic roller coaster. And like that's kind of what Call of Duty is now, and like for good and for bad. That's what it is. But it's a game, yeah, like I've got mixed feelings on it. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. And I kind of fall, like I would probably lean more towards, I think it's good, but I don't think it's great. How do you feel about it, Satsunami?
Oh boy. Honestly, I am in the same boat because you brought up a very interesting point there that this game came out in a very pivotal point of Call of Duty history. So before that, in between World at War and this one, we had a spectrum of games, didn't we?
Yeah.
We had the Black Ops series, we had Advanced Warfare, and this is the weird thing because people were getting, as you said, they were getting fatigued with the World War II setting. Everyone was going for the modern warfare setting, and of course, after so many games, people were getting tired of that. So Activision brought out Advanced Warfare, which, we'll talk about that one day. Don't get me wrong, we will talk about that. But, we had that, we had Ghosts, we had Infinite Warfare, which I think Infinite Warfare is the one that broke the camel's back. I think that was the one that there was the tipping point that people were like, oh, Call of Duty in space, oh, this is dumb. So this is something, and I'm interested to hear what you think about it, but I feel as if this game, and this is going to sound weird, but I don't feel as if, compared to the other ones, I don't feel as if this was like a natural progression for like the settings for the future games. I almost feel as if they put it in World War II because they wanted to save their own asses and the company. And the only reason I say that, and I know it's a company, they have to do what's best for the brand and all of this. But one thing that really does annoy me is this whole game does kind of feel like it's trying to tap into that nostalgic bone, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, and it really irks me. Like, you've got the health packs are back, which I was surprised. I was like, why the hell are the health packs back? I was like, we've moved on from that. And some people like that style of gameplay. Fair enough. I'm not going to poop on that opinion, but like, you've got the health packs, you've got the cheery sidekicks, which I'm sorry, I absolutely hate. Or I hate 90% of the cast because it feels like a Channel 5 / Hallmark film set in the Second World War. You've got one or two moments which I absolutely love. Like, as you said, Liberation, that's a great level. It actually reminds me of another level. I can't remember what it's called in Cold War, but there's a similar level for that where you're a Soviet general that has to go through the Kremlin. Thank God I remembered that. Don't worry, it'll be in the test. And yeah, you have to go through the Kremlin and you have to do similar things. You have to talk to people and see what's what kind of thing. And that's the same with this one. And I think that's really well done. The one criticism I will level against it, and I'm sorry, Adam, but I have to level it. But this game is riddled with cliches. And one of the ones that really annoyed me in this otherwise like really good level was when, I think, is it Rousseau that's the spy?
Yeah, the French.
Yeah, so she goes through, she's about to like sneak out a window when she comes face to face with this like high-ranking German officer who for some reason knows who she is, but like plays along with her, and is like, oh, so you went to Cambridge, oh, we can speak in English, even though they don't speak English, like he still speaks English and everything and German, and it alternates, and then it reveals, I knew it was you all along, and then she has this big moment of like stabbing him because he killed her like son, family, that kind of thing, and it just kind of felt, I don't know, like, what did you think of that scene? Because I don't want to be like, oh, it shouldn't have been there or anything, but it just seemed kind of, oh, it's there, like, oh, her character arc's done, and it's like, but we literally just met you one level ago. But sorry, what did you think?
No, I would say that's the exact problem. That's the problem with both this game and with a lot of the recent Call of Duties. They're trying to like tell like grand narratives with like, with fleshed out characters, layered characters, and they're trying to get you to care about these people, and they're trying to have character development. But the campaigns are so short. There's not enough time to get invested. And this game is, as you say, cliches. It's filled with stock characters because that's all they can really have time to do. So, as you say, we've got the kind of like funny, like, we've got the kind of like funny clowning sidekick. There's like the guy who's racist who basically then has a complete 180 and goes, oh no, being a racist is bad by the end of the game. You've got the kind of like troubled like lieutenant, commander in charge, and you've got like the harsh, like gruff, uncaring sergeant and everything, who's got like a troubled past. It's all stock characters because it can't be anything else. They don't have time to like, flesh these characters out. And the thing with that level of liberation and the end of Russo's character arc, with killing that Nazi officer and everything, like that would have been great if the whole game had been about Russo. But as you say, like she's introduced to the level before, and she's on this is like the last. She's only in 2 levels of the game. It's so rushed, and you just don't get enough. You don't have any reason to really care because, like it's so she's in the game so fleetingly. So it's that way that like I see what they're trying to do, but it's that way of like you don't have the space to do this. So yeah.
Well, I mean that, and it's not even like organically brought up in the story, because if you remember, and just as a kind of disclaimer, I bought this game like ages ago. I played a bit of the multiplayer, it was fun enough, but I never played the campaign. Like it's only recently that I've played it, so yeah, this is all still fresh in my mind. But the way she tells the audience this information is through a cutscene, and I kid you not, like you meet her the level before and she guides you like to your platoon. This is after the big chase where you have to chase the train and the train goes over you and it blows up.
Can I say I hate that level. I hate that level so much.
See, this is the thing. In fact, sorry, before I go on, I'll finish my point about Russo and then I'll come back to it. Don't you worry, you just sit there. But yeah, she just like says, I'm, oh, my family's dead and everything because of the Nazis. And it's like, okay, fair enough. I wonder how this is going to come back in the plot. And then, oh, spoilers, it comes back in the plot, which I don't have any trouble for that plot point being there. But it just seems strange that they just like rushed that in to obviously make the Nazis worse, which is like, I feel as if the Nazis are like the stock default bad. Like you can't get any worse. For the most part. And it's like, oh yeah, by the way, they killed this person's brother and son and family and you should feel bad. And it's like, I'm already feeling bad against them. They're Nazis. It's like, you don't need that extra. They've got all of this other stuff going on. It's like, and it honestly felt like this is going to sound terrible, but it almost felt like, who framed Roger Rabbit?
Yeah.
At the very end, there's that villain that says, like, I killed your brother and he sounded just like this. It almost felt like that when the Nazi officer was saying, oh, I killed your son. And, he sounded just like this. And it's like, okay, just do we need this in the game? I don't know. I feel as if it could have been in the game, but it could have been fleshed out better. That's the main issue I have with this entire game. It's just filled with hallmark characters. And going back to the train, let's go back to that for a second, if that's okay. I hate the way that this game treats the war as a spectacle, as a Michael Bay flick.
Yeah.
And that is something that we do, like we say a lot on this show and we kind of throw around. But I absolutely hate it because there's some really good moments. Like I love the level, see when you have to go to the basement to get the girl that's ran away, and you have to hide from the German soldiers and everything, and it's like quite tense. I like small moments like that where you kind of peel away and you're like, oh, we're getting to spend time with the actual German civilians that are caught in the crossfire. That's something that's not really explored very much. Or, oh, we're going to explore the French resistance, but then immediately, as soon as like we're over with that set piece, it's like, okay, we're done. We need the next big set piece. Oh, the person's been shot. Oh no, get these civvies out of here. And it's just, it's ridiculous, and I don't appreciate it. I mean, maybe there are people out there who do appreciate it. And again, I don't want to take away from that. There is one particular scene I really want to talk about, again, pertaining to the sensitive material that we are going to touch on. But I did not appreciate a lot of this game because of just the fact it was over the top, and it keeps flashing back to Daniel's character, who's like the main guy that you play as. He's got like a pregnant wife at home, and he keeps having flashbacks to his brother who, spoilers, it turns out he's dead at the end. But let's face it, you could see that a mile off.
It's pointless as well. Those flashbacks are pointless. Like
they are. They just keep detracting from the actual game. Like even if you went, oh, I didn't see that coming, you're like, okay, what does that change? Because like 2 seconds earlier, Daniels is up like a bell tower and he jumps out as it collapses on top of him. And then later they bring up, oh, the wolves attacking your brother and I can't shoot them. And you're like, okay.
It's funny as well because like that flashback is so pointless, and I don't get why it's there. But this game was crying out for a flashback mission, like to Pearson. So Pearson is like the sergeant who's like really harsh and uncaring, and like doesn't seem to give a crap about like his soldiers' lives. But he's got this like really like troubled past. And this game was crying out, and I can't believe this isn't in the game. It was crying out for a flashback level where you played as Pearson like earlier in the war, and it's discovered that he made this decision, which he thought was like made this decision to like try and save his soldiers' lives, which ended up killing them all. And this is what's like completely like broken him. And I was like, how is this not a flashback level? How do we not go back, and see this? But it's just explained away in like some like expository lines by other characters, and it's like it's so weird to me. I'm like that you're so intent on focusing on this like story of the wolves, which leads nowhere and is utterly meaningless. And you have this prime opportunity to have an actually great like flashback mission where we can uncover like we could actually have some good character development. It's bizarre to me.
Pearson, initially I got really annoyed with him very fast, because you have like the kind of duality of officers. You've got Turner, who's the goody two shoes of a good soldier never leaves a man behind and all of this, and then you've got Pearson, who of course, as you said, is very just gruff and nearly just like shoots your character at one point and you're like, Jesus Christ, he's just an arsehole throughout the whole thing. And then you, as you said, you realise that it's because he abandoned his men. And it's something that isn't like, it's not explored until the very end of the game. And I feel as if that's criminal, personally. Would you say as well that this, well, as you said, sorry, before, it is a missed opportunity. It should have been like a flashback. It should have been something. But it really amounts to him like getting angry, drinking, and then, as you said, like in the other games, he does like a 180, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, you're my friend now. And that's it. It's story arc over. Nobody cares. And yeah, you've got the specky sidekick who I hate his character, because he comes back, like Daniels comes back into the squad, and the specky guy's like, oh, the gang's all here. And then it's like, no, except the one guy. The one guy that I'm here for, the reason I'm still here, instead of in the arms of my loving wife. It's just annoying. But before we jump into some of the more sensitive topics of this game, is there anything else you want to touch on?
I think I would just briefly like expand on like something we're talking about, and just like the cinematic quote unquote nature of this.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. Like, it's Michael Bay-esque at points, and it really detracts from it, because like it makes the game sit uneasily, because there are some moments, as you said, that are like genuinely like quite harrowing, and there's like I think actually the first level of the game kind of encapsulates this very well. But the first level of the game is the D-Day landings, where you land on Omaha Beach, and like the first part of that mission is like it's Saving Private Ryan-esque. It's like utterly brutal, and like it's unforgiving. You're desperately trying to like run up the beach and like take cover as like guys are getting like ripped apart around you, and that feels like authentic and real, and like it's a great opening. But then there's a bit like towards the end of the game where like your best friend gets like wounded, and you need to like drag him to safety, and it becomes like the game turns into basically Time Crisis, one of these arcadey shooters where you like drag your soldier for a bit, then you like stop, pull out your pistol, shoot a couple of Germans, drag him a bit further, stop, shoot, and it's terrible. Like I actually hate that, because it completely ruins like what the game was like building, and like then you've got some levels that are like, there's a couple of levels later on where you're fighting in like what's called the Hurtgen Forest, which is this like heavily forested area like on the German border, and some of those there's two levels there which are really brutal. There's one where you need to like fight your way up this hill where it's like raining, and it's like a really brutal, like there's like the mud everywhere, and and people are like, soldiers like dying and like just planting into this like mud and like getting torn apart, and it's like very visceral and like quite harrowing in its own way. But then you have the train level where you're like chasing down this like armored German train in your Jeep and like hijacking it like, I don't know, like it's Starsky and Hutch or something. Like it's ridiculous. Like it just sits so uneasily, and it's just like it's that way that like what I really hoped was this game would go back to kind of what Call of Duty was before, but it just didn't. Like it stayed stuck in what the series has become, and I think that's really the greatest sin of this game.
I think this was something that I mentioned to you, see, as I was playing through it. Not only do I feel as if this is a massive step backwards for Call of Duty, like, as I said, with the health packs, with everything else, but the main thing that I really hate about this game is the fact it gamifies the Second World War. And don't get me wrong, you might, like, listeners at home, you might be thinking, what do I mean by that, gamifying the Second World War? Because these are games at the end of the day. They're not really, meant to be films or cinematic experiences, but I think that's what they're trying to do here. Because I remember, like, I was playing this, and my partner was watching me play this, and she was saying, "Oh, you look like you're watching a film," and that's honestly what it felt like. It felt, because I had to put down the controller, and there's like this huge CGI cutscene that's going along, and like I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but if you look at something like World at War, there's no cutscenes in that game. Like, if you remember back, there's like the snippets in between, and it shows you like real life footage of the war, and it shows you like where they're going and everything, but there's never really, there's scripted scenes. Like, don't get me wrong, there are scripted scenes, but there's not really many cutscenes, is there?
No, like, and if there are cutscenes, it's the ones like you're still in control of the camera. It's that way of, you can still, like, you still have some level of control.
Yeah, it's like the in-game cutscenes, whereas, how do I put this very nicely? At least in the Xbox One version, there is definitely a noticeable difference in the quality.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when you look around and you see like this Hollywood movie of, we won't leave anyone behind, you gotta get out of here. All the cliches. Like, insert your own here. Pause the episode and insert your own here and then play it again. You done that? Okay, good. Whereas in this, though, there's like, as you said, there's a lot of like moments that just grind the game to a halt. Not just with, the cinematics where it's like you have to jump out like a collapsing church, the train mission, as I said, the you killed my son, prepare to die moment. Like, there's quick time events as well, which really, that sent me over the edge. I'm like, quick time events? Really? But it's not even normal quick time events. Some of them are, but there's ones where it's like you have to drag your, like, not cursor, but you have to drag the thing over to a circle, and then you have to press the button that appears inside the circle. I don't get why that was a conscious choice. It just feels as if, like, between the almost unrealistic aspect of it, it just feels like you're playing a video game. Like, with World at War, obviously you did feel like you're playing a game, but there was so much content within that. You could immerse yourself in the experience. You were on the edge of your seat, when you were in the Pacific Theatre, and like ankle deep in mud and water as you were like going through the jungles and trying to, stave off ambushes. And even, with the Russians, you had to sneak through Stalingrad, you had to storm, Berlin. All of these moments are like kind of well warranted. They all build up somewhere. Whereas with World War II, it just felt as if, I don't know, it didn't feel deserved. It just felt as if, oh yeah, it's another World War II game. See if this was any other game, if this was like the first entry of a game series, that they did a World War II game, maybe I would give it a bit more slack. Maybe I would be like, oh, well, at least it's the first game. Call of Duty has been running for years now. Like, World War II was their first games. This should be their bread and butter. There's no excuse whatsoever, like, as to why this suddenly feels so gamey, so, cinematic, and not in a good way. It's not cinematic like, wow, look at that train fly over my head, or wow, look at those buildings collapse. Oh, gee whiz, I hope I get across the Rhine in time. One thing also I want to point out is, see the level with the planes. Whoever designed that level should have been fired. That's all I want to say. I hated that level. It was some of the worst controls, just some of the worst gameplay I've ever played. But anyway, sorry. Trying to get back on you. Did you feel that way as well?
Yeah, like, I completely see what you mean. That's, I said, like, it sits uneasily for me, this game, because it kind of almost feels at odds with itself or what it's trying to do. One thing I'll say is, personally, I don't mind the bar health. I actually find bar health a refreshing change now from like constant regenerating health. But like, there are other elements in it where like your different members of your squad have like different power-ups basically and abilities, one of which is like the Sergeant Pearson can highlight all the enemies in the nearby area, and that kind of like, that feels a bit, Call of Duty gets away with like these kind of cinematic moments and stuff like in the kind of modern and future settings because they're not based on real history. And as you say, it feels weird and maybe wrong when it's like historical events, quote unquote. It just, But I agree with you. It feels gamey in all the wrong ways, in the ways that you don't want it to feel gamey.
Because I have to admit, I did like the idea of you could ask your teammates for like health or ammo. That
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with. But it was Pearson's X-ray vision. I was like, what was he, an X-Man? What is this? And it completely took me out of it completely took me out of the game. And as I said, like, I'm not going to pretend that, World at War was like the perfect, flawless game that, it did no wrong or anything, but I don't remember getting X-ray vision in that or anything, but unless I'm completely remembering wrong. But it's the fact that for these games, World War II is very much a real setting. It's one of the most bloody and brutal conflicts in human history. And again, you don't have to listen to me saying that to, think, oh yeah, it was, because you'll all know from history, either history classes, documentary, that one copy of Das Boot that your granddad keeps in the cupboard. You don't have to have me telling you that this was a bloody conflict. But when you get this retelling of history, as it were, like, it's one thing to make up your own story. Okay, it's one thing to be like, oh, you're just, a soldier and, I don't know, bum nowhere. That will postcode bum nowhere, Paris. But it's the fact that you're one of the most important members of, like, the American army.
Yeah.
You've got all these buddies, you think, oh, all the cliches are coming out and everything. You're like, okay, what's going to happen here? It doesn't sit well with me either, personally. Like, this is something I was talking to you about before we recorded, but there's been a lot of division amongst fans for this, and I'm interested to hear what you say about it. It's this idea that a lot of people complain that it's not realistic enough, or it's not as historically accurate. And don't get me wrong, like, some of them are stupid, like them saying, oh no, a female in World War II? Stop the presses. We can't have that. She's showing her ankles. You get silly things like that, and you think that doesn't matter at all. But when you get things, that are more, how to put this, like, more serious, as I said, like the X-ray vision and, being like a one-man army against all these people. Like, I mean, it's World War II. It's not exactly the power fantasy era.
No.
Except for Wolfenstein. Of course, that's a whole different thing. But, like, for World War II as it is, it seems quite dodgy when they take liberties. Like, there's a particular example I want to touch on, but before we get into that, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, like, I think it's a valid, like, it's an interesting debate, and I think if there's valid criticisms, to be leveled against, is it right? Because they are skewing history in a way, like, in how it's presented, in that, like, I suppose it depends on how you look at this. Like, if you're looking at this as purely like a form of entertainment, then I don't think it really matters that much.
Yeah.
If though you think that, if you view it more as like, I'm trying to think, but as like a learning material, and I'm not saying that this, like, should be put in schools as a learning material, but if you look at it as like a partial learning material, this game doesn't give you a very good, like, a sense of, like, World War II generally, like, in the way things happen and stuff. Like, it's bad in that way. So I guess it kind of depends where you want to, like, fall on that debate. I don't really know where I fall on it. I probably fall more on the, like, it bothers me a bit as somebody who's really interested in World War II history, but, like, on the other hand, I don't think this should be treated as a learning material. So I'm kind of willing to be like, okay, you know what, fine. You can take the kind of liberties, because it is an entertainment thing at the end of the day. So I probably more fall on that kind of side of it, of being like, yeah, okay, it's not maybe accurate, but I can probably forgive it.
No, that's fair enough, because at the end of the day, it is a video game.
Yeah.
Something to pass the time. It is entertainment. It is, because I know there's the flip side of people saying, oh, it's not realistic, and you think, okay, like, what would you do? And sometimes it's like really stupid suggestions that would just, in theory, make a terrible video game.
Yeah.
Like, oh, one shot kills, or if you want to play a game like that, usually play something like Arma.
There are games like that if you want to play.
Yeah, there's a market out there for them, but at the same time, like, it's not how to put this? I have to admit, it's not something like agreeing with you, and apologies for jumping on your bandwagon here, but it is a bit of a mix. It's like, do you do it? Do you make it historically accurate and maybe take the risk of making it a bit duller? Or, see, this is the thing as well, because as I say that, I'm just thinking this is like a real life event that even if they're creating a game out of it, you want them to treat it with respect in a way. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like 100% that certain issues are taboo. Again, as I've been building up to, there is one particular scene I want to talk about. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Again, going into kind of sensitive material, I'm of course talking about the very end of the game where you get to walk through a concentration camp. So basically, throughout the game, you have a friend called, is it Zussman?
Yeah, Zussman.
Zussman, and he is revealed throughout the game to be half German, and he's also Jewish as well. And it ends up he gets captured by the Germans towards I think it's like the 8th level, like 7th or 8th level, like really late in the game. And he gets taken to this, he gets lined up with the other POWs and speaks back against the Germans, and he's saying, "Oh, you Nazi bastards," and everything. As you would expect for that character, to which he gets beaten and then thrown on the train and then sent to the concentration camp. And you don't really see him until like the very end of the game, where by coincidence you go through the camp and then you run through a forest and you end up finding him being chased by a German officer, which quite frankly is the biggest like coinkydink I think I've ever seen in a game. Where it's like, oh, what are the chances the only German in a 100-mile radius running after a prisoner, when you think, well, maybe he should have been running the opposite way. And of course you shoot him, you save Zussman, and everything's not okay, but everything's, you've achieved your mission is what I'm trying to get at. But in this level, you walk through a concentration camp that's empty, and you walk through it and you have like your friend who takes the pictures, and they're saying like, oh, we need to let the world know, and they're taking pictures of like dead bodies that have been hung up and things like there's two kind of tied to a pole, and then they kind of say, oh, this is where they hung them, this is where they put them in as animals. This is my issue with it, the fact that at best it seems kind of lazy to bring it up in the way they did it, and at worst it's probably downright insensitive, because they just like, they kind of walk you through the park almost like an interactive well, not an interactive experience. I don't want to give the wrong impression here and be like, like one of those articles that you get where it's like someone who's against video games and they say like, in this game you can shoot people and do this and that, and it's like a misrepresentation. So I don't want to give it a misrepresentation, but you walk through the camp and then it's really just for the purpose of the allies or the American characters just to say, oh, this is a terrible place, the Nazis were awful people, as they obviously should. But then that's it, really. Then you save Zussman outside of the forest. It just doesn't sit well with me, I have to say. Being someone who has like visited one of these camps as well, there is something harrowing about going around, because I went on it was like an organised trip through the school that I used to go to, where we went to visit Auschwitz in Poland. And you go through and you see like the absolutely devastating scenes of this camp, and how like this was obviously like a real thing, and just the horrific implications of everything. To kind of have this as a tidbit at the end, like I said this to you kind of half facetiously, saying it almost feels like a do you remember moment at the end of the game. Like I wouldn't have too much issues if they had it like in the middle of the game, but it's the fact they kind of just throw it at the end of the game, but nothing really comes out of it, if you know what I mean. It just feels as if it's there to say remember the camps. I get what they're trying to go for, because it's a very sensitive topic, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting, oh, they should have had close-ups and everything, and oh, look at the horrors of it, because I personally don't really know how I would have done it in that situation. But it just seems like a very weird choice to just tag it on to the end and have it almost non-consequential. Like, what did you think? Because sorry for taking up time there to talk about it there, but like, what did you think?
I see what you're saying, and I see where you're coming from. I have to disagree, though. I don't want to say I like that they put this in, but like, I think it was a good thing that they put this part of the war in, because this, like, the Holocaust and, you know, like what happened to slave labor in Nazi Germany and concentration camps and all this part, this is not something that you see in most video games. There's one video game which I was going to say the name of, and I can't find it. It's gone out of my mind now, and I can't remember what it is. But it's a game that kind of deals with this, and I think it's really good. It's a very different game to any kind of Call of Duty game, but it's very good. If I remember the name, I'll say it. It's not something you ever see, really, in video games, especially in something like a Call of Duty game. And honestly, like, I think it's a part of the war that you can forget when you're playing these games, you know, like, because they don't touch on it at all, and you can kind of forget in a way, like, what the Nazi regime was to an extent, because you are just kind of fighting, like, you know, faceless, like, you know, enemy German soldiers at the end of the day. So having this moment to, like, just, you know, to go into this camp and to can explore it and walk in, I think was important, and I'm glad they did it. I think the problem, and I think there is one thing that I think you're completely right in, and I think they shouldn't have had this bit, is the whole bit at the end, as you say, where you have to go rescue. It goes back to a game very quickly, and you're charging through to go rescue Zussman. That was a mistake, and I don't think they should have had that at all. Like, that really doesn't sit well with it. So I think that was a big mistake on that part. But I have to be honest, I actually think it was quite a brave thing to do in a Call of Duty game to explore. And even, like, you know, we don't see the full horrors of it, really, and perhaps you're right, we probably shouldn't. I don't know if, again, it kind of goes back to when we talked about the Modern Warfare game, like, how much of a right environment is a Call of Duty game to discuss some of these, like, kind of issues. But I do think it was a brave step to include this, and I think it was important, and I am glad they did it.
I mean, it's as you said, it's not, for obvious reasons, but it's not something that is explored in these kind of games. You know, it's not, like, for obvious reasons, again, it's a very sensitive subject in human history. It's like a terrible atrocity, and you're completely right, because that was something that, and I have to admit, I'll get onto it, like, when we finally discuss Vanguard, but for this game at least, usually in games like World War II games, you always fight against, like, a faceless horde.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not so much, like, obviously you're fighting Nazis, first and foremost you are. Yeah, it's clear, it's kind of laid out, this is who you're fighting. But at the same time, it's never really, you know, you don't feel as if that's who you're fighting. You know, it's like if you play a Star Wars game and, you know, you're shooting down, like, kind of ironically, you're shooting down stormtroopers there as well, but you're just shooting down faceless, you know, people, like NPCs, like these digital characters. Something that I have to admit I really did appreciate was, I don't know if you got this, but see in the level Liberation, where you go into there's a area you can go into, I think it's the toilets you go into, and you can hear, like, two women talking, like, in the cubicles, and they're basically talking about, you know, their families and things, and how one of their husbands is away in the Eastern Front fighting and things like that. It's kind of perspectives that I don't feel as if in, especially the World War II games, it's not really explored as much. And I did appreciate those kind of small tidbits. You know, it wasn't just saying at the time, you know, everyone in Germany was to blame and everything, and oh, it was terrible. Because I love, like, small moments where we see, like, the German civilians who are caught in the crossfire, and, you know, they are wanting to escape because, you know, like, it's not all black and white. It's the fact that there were these civilians as well who were trying to escape the Nazis. It was just such, like, a brutal time of history, really. And again, I know I'm stating the obvious, but I do agree with you. I feel as if it definitely was important to have this in, because I'm sitting here saying it's, like, lazy to put it in. Maybe that's the wrong word. Like, maybe that is the wrong word. I'm glad they put it in, but yeah, I just wish they had done it better. But that's me speaking on hindsight, though. Like, I can easily sit here, you know, in my chair and be like, oh yeah, if I was there, I would have done it differently. See, in all honesty, I genuinely don't know how I would have done that, because controversies in Call of Duty are, you know, they're common, aren't they?
Yeah. Especially now they are.
Oh yeah, you've got like as we spoke about in our Modern Warfare retrospective, you've got like you've got war crimes that are based on real life war crimes. You've got
White
white phosphorus, yeah, children getting blown up, acts of terrorism. You've just got all these things that now have become a spectacle and like a set piece almost of games.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say though is, although I'm kind of criticising it slightly, I don't feel as if it was like, see when this game came out, was that controversial?
The concentration camp
Yeah,
scene.
the bit at the end.
I don't recall it being controversial.
Mhm.
I have to admit. I actually remember more people kind of praising.
Yeah.
I mean, I might be wrong here, and maybe I've missed, but I can't recall it being a controversial thing. I remember there being, there was like it wasn't really controversy, but there was discussion about is that like for a while, a lot of World War II games like had refrained from using the swastika. They'd use like a kind of you get the kind of Iron Cross flag, German flag, and things because the swastika is outlawed in Germany, and it's like I don't think a game can be sold there. Maybe if it has that in, there may be some stuff there. So a lot of games had removed that from it, and like I think this game originally was going to, but then they decided to put the swastika in.
Yeah.
And I think that was also another correct decision. I say because that is again something that going back to historical accuracy, I think it is important to have that in there as representative of what it was. But yeah, so that I don't recall the controversy about the concentration camps. I have to admit, but I might be just forgetting, or I might have just missed something.
No, I think you're right, because the only reason I'm asking this because I can't actually remember. I remember it being mentioned, but I don't remember people getting up in arms to be like, "Oh, how dare this scene be in," or anything. Like what the usual response is for a Call of Duty controversy. But for this, it seems as if it was received more positively. And I have to admit, I'm kind of glad for that in a way, that although, as I said, I am not a big fan of this game, I think it's too flashy, too showy and everything, I do appreciate where they've gone with it. And especially with that scene at the end. One other thing that somebody else did mention was comparing World at War to this game again. Apparently in World at War, at the very end of the game, they give you the casualty list.
Yeah.
And they say so many million people died during the war, and they give you the statistics and things. Whereas in this game, they slap it at the beginning. And I think that is quite telling. It's like they're getting that kind of thing out the way first, because with World at War they do show you realistic, or not realistic, but they show you real newsreels, of people getting shot, of people trying to fight back against whatever enemy they're fighting against, and it's brutal, it's in your face, and it brings it down to this kind of realism level. But in this game, it's all CGI, good looking GI Joes, that are fighting against the Nazis because that's what they did. And it's it does kind of lose the human element in a way. You see less and less of Daniel's struggle as, this character, and more of just more of a video game character getting from point A to B.
Yeah, well, I think as well, comparing Call of Duty World War II to World at War, they started off with different objectives. World at War is trying to show the horrors, and the brutality of World War II, and it really strips away any kind of glory, as we said, from it, so that's what its kind of aim is. But with World War II, it's trying to tell a tale of heroes. It's more akin to kind of a lot of World War II films, both of during the war, after the war, and now kind of tales of heroism, and valor and things like that. So that's more the tone it's going for, rather than an exploration of not that it's a totally accurate exploration, but a kind of quote unquote exploration of the realities of war. World at War is more trying to do.
Yeah, so more like Band of Brothers.
Yeah, in that kind of way, kind of Saving Private Ryan, those kind of films, and the older ones of that kind of tale of heroism and glory and kind of things like that. rather than like something like maybe more akin to like Das Boot for like World at War, where it's really the kind of grim realities of like, you know, life and death struggle.
So, what would you say, like, before we go into like our thoughts about Vanguard, which, of course, as we mentioned before, had come out yesterday at the time of recording this? What would you say, like, what are your final thoughts on the best versus the worst of like this series of games?
Yeah. Okay, just before I go into that, can I just say I've remembered the name of that game that I was struggling to remember earlier.
Oh, do tell.
It's called Atontat 1942. It's available on Steam. It's a point and click adventure, and it's a very different experience to any of the kind of World War II Call of Duty games. But if you're looking for a game that kind of explores a more like a kind of accurate portrayal of some of the horrors of war, especially of living under Nazi occupation, then I'd highly recommend it. Very, very good. Very, very good game. But yeah, so going back to your question, like my favorite still of the World War II Call of Duties is Call of Duty 2, just because I think it's the best. Like, I think what it does, it's the best. Like, it's the best kind of experience, and like I think it's just such a tightly like crafted and polished game that I think is the most fun to play. Enjoy likes, but it really depends what you're wanting to go for. Like, because Call of Duty 1 and 2 are really good, but they're not like, if you're looking for like a kind of like more thematic or narrative, you know, experience, and they're not the ones to go for. I think like, for me, like the two shining examples are Call of Duty 2 and Call of Duty World at War. I look to Call of Duty 2 because I think it's the best like crafted of all of them, but like World at War I think is the most interesting in what it's trying to do, and in like its exploration of like parts of the war and like it's true horrors really. So I think they're like the two best examples. In terms of the worst, like I think from like a kind of gameplay perspective, I'd maybe lean a bit more towards Call of Duty 3 because I think it's the roughest. You know, I don't think it holds together as well in that respect. And then, but like on a more kind of maybe like I don't know, like for lack of a better word, philosophical kind of like level, I think World War II, just because it's getting kind of pulled apart in what it wants to be and what it's trying to be. It's like on one hand it's trying to be Hollywood Michael Bay, you know, esque, but on the other hand it's like, oh, but here's like grim realities and like, you know, the horrors of war and everything. And they just can't, those two things can't reconcile themselves, and it feels like a game at conflict with itself, and I think that kind of hampers it really.
It is, like, I would probably agree with that. Just instead of Call of Duty 2, substituting that with World at War is the best, because I have to admit, like, I'm not a big fan of the first, like, the American half of it. Although it's, like, brutal when it's very, as we said, visceral. Like, I wouldn't say that's my favourite, like, of all the Call of Duties, but, I mean, in terms of, like, a World War II setting, it's something that takes the series in, like, a very different direction. It's very fresh and interesting compared to, like, the predecessors. I do agree with like Call of Duty 3 being dated. As I said, I played it again, didn't enjoy it at all. It was alright, but it wasn't. It felt more like a game when you're like, oh, I've got to go to point A to stop the Nazis. Yeah, it's like, World War II, I agree, it's definitely the weakest. I was not a huge fan of it, as you know, I pointed out, and I do agree. I just wish it had done certain things either better or decided what identity it wanted, because that's the thing. When this game came out, it came out when all of these space shooters were really popular, and it was like, pew pew pew, look, I'm an astronaut, mom. Disliked. And yeah, like if I had to hear like boots on ground one more time, I would have gone mental. Honestly, it was like that's, as you said, that's how it was advertised. It was like boots on ground, and look, no jetpacks, and it's like, really, is this like all they have to say for people to buy the game? It's like, no jetpacks, I'm sold. You son of a bitch, I'm in. It's just, I feel as if World War II did have the scope and it did have the resources to produce maybe something a bit better, but I don't know. Hopefully, like I say, like, you know, hopefully the future will be better, but we actually do have our next game in World War II, which came out yesterday. That, of course, being Vanguard. Just to kind of summarise, or just to kind of wrap up, do you want to give your quick thoughts on Vanguard so far?
So I've only played the campaign so far. So I've not touched multiplayer. I've not touched zombies, and I'm unlikely to touch zombies because I'm very much in your school of thought on what zombies has become. But so this is just a pure on the campaign. It's okay. That's really what I can say. It's short again, and again, I feel it suffers from a lot of the similar problems we talked about World War II. I feel it's at conflict with itself and what it's trying to do. And again, it's that way they're trying to pack a lot into like a very kind of short experience. So it's not bad. It's okay.
I have a very negative view, I have to say, of this game so far. So I got it delivered through Amazon today and was like, oh, I can't wait to play it. And I was hoping to have like completed the campaign by the time I came on this podcast, but turns out that if you want to play this game on the Xbox, you have to install a 23 gigabyte update, and then once that's done and all your extra content packs are downloaded, because I went out with my partner for a walk, we just went out, and then we came back and it's like, oh, it's done. So I pressed it and then it was like, boom, you want to play this game? 41 gigabytes. It's like, oh. So I downloaded that. It took a couple hours, but I downloaded it and I managed to get a couple of levels in before. It's funny you should mention it's like World War II, because I honestly feel as if this is just like a mod of World War II. It's the same game. It's just the same game. And usually like that is a critique like levied against Call of Duty as a whole, saying, oh, it's the same game. Oh, why are you surprised? I mean, it's literally the same game. You've got the same dog models. You've got the same German models. There's maybe a couple of small differences. You've got the same ammo boxes to shoot and blow up that are bright red. The only difference is the characters. We get a more intimate view of like the Nazis against the Vanguard team that you're playing as, which I feel is quite interesting. But see, overall, I'm really not impressed by it. Some bits are good. Again, it's like World War II. It's like there's some nuggets of, oh, this is quite interesting, but I don't have hope. I'm going to be honest. I think I'm exactly the same. I think it's okay, but I feel as if this is kind of, it represents what Call of Duty is becoming, if you know what I mean. And I don't want to sound pretentious and be like, oh, this is the Call of Duty nowadays, but it's that kind of geared towards the Warzone crowds, the microtransactions. I'm going to admit it as well. See the menu screen for this? It is ugly as hell. And this has been going on since Modern Warfare, because you've got Modern Warfare, then they introduced Warzone. So you had Modern Warfare on one side and Warzone on the other. Then they introduced Cold War. So you had an extra tab for that. Now you've got Vanguard, and now there's a fourth tab. It just looks ugly. It looks ugly and terrible. And yeah, I will play the campaign because I'm halfway through it already. But what I'm seeing of it so far, I'm not enthralled. I like it well enough, but it's not amazing. And yeah, sorry, that was just a massive dump of a rant to be like, it stinks and I don't like it.
I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to download anything anymore.
So yeah, just as a kind of closing thought, are you hopeful for the future of like World War II games, or do you think it's had its time?
I mean, I don't think it's had its time. I mean, I still think there is a place for World War II games. I think now, especially like since we're in a more varied FPS market, there's a lot more variation there. So I don't think there's as much you're likely to run into. I think the fatigue now is more with franchises,
yeah,
rather than like settings that we had in like the early 2000s. So I think there's still a place for World War II games in general, FPS and otherwise. With regards to Call of Duty in a World War II setting, I don't really have much hope, because I feel Call of Duty is in a very particular frame now. It's that very like, it's a short cinematic experience, and I just don't think it quite works with the World War II setting, especially what they've tried to do with it. I just don't think it really works now. I mean, I hope that they'll if they went back to a more like the structure of those original Call of Duties. I think it really would work well. I think it would actually be a bit of a refreshing change, to be honest. But I've got to be honest, the way it is now, I don't really have that much hope. I'll stay a little bit optimistic, but no, not from what I've seen.
It does seem like indicative of the way Call of Duty's going now, where it's like they'll put in a campaign, but obviously the focus will be the multiplayer. I have to admit, I'm in the same boat. I haven't played the multiplayer. I might check it out after I finish the campaign. Again, zombies, not interested at all. Maybe I'll check it out of morbid curiosity, but yeah, probably not.
It's probably worth saying our mutual friend who really enjoys the zombie stuff said he wasn't particularly impressed with the zombies in Vanguard. So
Oh wow,
doesn't look like maybe it's that good.
that is really telling.
Yeah.
That is really telling. Oof. Okay, I'm gonna need to go lie down and think about that. And yeah, on that note, yeah, thank you, Adam, for discussing this topic, because I know it kind of got a bit serious and heavy at times, so thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. I think it's important to discuss these things, and I'm glad we got this forum where we can do that, and we can have a nice rational discussion about these important issues. So yeah, my pleasure. Always happy to be here.
As always, guys, thank you all so much for joining us in this episode today. Stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.